Greetings and welcome to the recombobulation area. My name is Dan Schaefer. Thank you for joining us. Anytime I record a podcast these days, I feel like I need to tell people the exact time and date that I'm recording this podcast because so much has been changing so quickly. Candidates are in, candidates are out, news is nonstop. So this is Monday, August 3rd, 11 a.m. We are at Dandy in the city of Milwaukee. Shout out to our hosts at Dandy for being so accommodating to us here. And I'm here with Milwaukee County Executive David Crowley. Mr. Crowley, thank you for joining the recombobulation area.
Always a pleasure to be on the recombobulation area.
So there's a lot I want to talk to you about. It's been 16 days since you re-entered the race for governor. There are 8 days now until the primary. I want to talk to you a bit about what you've been up to these last 16 days, what your plans are for the next 8 days. First, I want to talk to you about something that Governor Tony Evers said in a video your campaign released over the weekend. What he said in the headline of that video was, David will get things done. So I want to ask you about the things that you have gotten done in your time as Milwaukee County Executive and the things you want to get done if you were to be elected governor. So first, what do you consider to be your 3 biggest accomplishments in your 6 years as Milwaukee County Executive?
Oh man, I feel like that's unfair. It's like asking your favorite child in a sense. But I think that we've done a lot of great work within Milwaukee County. First and foremost, housing has always been extremely important to me, having dealt with housing instability. So to be able to invest more than $50 million in affordable housing throughout Milwaukee County is an incredible feat that we have accomplished. We've invested in housing first, and because of that, we have the lowest unsheltered homeless count per capita than any community in the entire country. And I think that's something that we should be yelling from the mountaintops so people understand. The other thing is that we've also tackled the opioid epidemic. We received the largest settlement dollars in Wisconsin history for a local unit of government. We're going to get about $100 million over the next 18 years. And because of our investments in working with grassroots organizations, those with lived experiences, we've lowered our overdose deaths by 40% in just 4 short years. And that's because we're on the grounds working each and every single day. But we also know that here in the state of Wisconsin, there has been a shared revenue problem. And we have been able to bring more money back, close to about $100 million a year since 2023. That was through the shared revenue reform and the deal that we were able to get for our highway patrol reimbursement, something that we never had in the past 60 years.
What was something that you really learned from that experience being, in negotiations with the governor, with the assembly speaker, and so many other folks to get that deal over the finish line?
Well, the one thing that I learned the most is, and I talk about it all the time, is the power of relationships. When you have not transactional relationships, but authentic relationships, it allows that trust to be there. And it allowed that, because of that trust, we were able to be transparent and actually get this piece of legislation done. But I want to be very honest, like, this wasn't a cakewalk. I mean, we worked on this legislation for 2-3 years, but because we didn't stop, right, we were able to get it done. And so the one thing is that in government, in politics, things may not happen as fast as you want it to happen, but you can get things done as long as you continue to focus on your end goal, build relationships, because it's not just a Milwaukee, it wasn't just a Milwaukee problem. It was a state of Wisconsin problem.
Yeah, and it has taken a while to get there. And it was really, Act 12 was such a huge accomplishment in so many ways to deal with that, but it's not the end of the line, right? I mean,
No.
Do you see shared revenue as still a major issue that the state needs to address going forward?
Oh, absolutely. And what's been unique, it's not just an urban issue. It's a suburban issue. It's a rural issue. I just did a swing over this past weekend. We were in Wausau, we were in Hudson, we were in Superior, Woodruff, Ashland, Rhinelander. And shared revenue is one of the biggest issues that they're actually talking about. The levy limits, how they can invest in fixing their own infrastructure or in public safety. And so while Act 12 provided some relief, it did not solve all of our problems. And the shared revenue formula, it's over 100 years old. I don't know any business or any person that's been able to do the exact same thing for 100 years and been able to sustain. And so we have to make sure that we tackle this, because we can't continue to put Band-Aids over broken limbs, because that's what this is.
So then looking forward, there is a realistic possibility for a Democratic trifecta in Wisconsin for the first time in a generation. Wisconsin finally toppled the gerrymander that warped politics in the state for so many years. And so there is a realistic chance that Democrats could win both the state Senate and state assembly. It's Wisconsin. It's going to be a toss up, right? So we know it's going to be a tough battle. But if you were to become governor with a Democratic trifecta, what would you want to do? What would you want to be on your, on the top of your list for your state budget, your first 100 days? What is a David Crowley administration with a Democratic trifecta look like?
One, Democrats, we need to be bold, right? I think our problem is that we have not been on the offense. Governor Tony Evers, he's been the steady, calm strength that we have needed. Defeated Scott Walker, got us through COVID, and quite frankly, he's been the best damn goalie with us having a Republican-controlled legislature. And so he hasn't been able to be on the offense. And I think this has really hindered our ability to push good policies, but also to get people to believe in the Democratic Party. So we can't continue to respond to Trump. We can't continue to respond to Republicans because they're going to define us. So to be on the offense, one, we have to make sure that we're taking care of our children. So we need to make sure that childcare is not just accessible, but it's affordable, which means that every child under the age of 5 should have access to a subsidized slot. We have to be working with our providers, whether it's Head Start or nonprofits or our tribal communities, to make sure we understand what the floor is and what it means to operate at cost and not below cost. But that helps to build a better foundation of learning for our kids before they enter our public education system, which means that we have to go back to a 2/3 funding formula and increase the reimbursement rates for our public schools. They have a mandate. They don't get to pick and choose who comes into those public schools. And so we can't ask them to continue to go to referendum. The state needs to step up. We need to expand Badger Care, making sure that no one continues to fall through the cracks and they don't continue to see their premiums skyrocket, and they have access to providers within their community so they don't have to travel 1, 2, 3 hours away in order to get the care that they need. Working 40 hours a week and still having to rely on social service programs, which means that we have to raise the minimum wage and we have to repeal Act 10 and right to work for less. But we have to do more than that. We have to enshrine workers' rights into our state constitution, because as long as this pendulum keeps swinging, we'll never be able to have stability. And then last but certainly not least, something near and dear to me when I think about, not just my first 100 days, I would say 30 days, right? Because this is about being bold. Is also making sure that, victims of domestic violence have the resources and the supports that they need. But at the end of the day, I want to make sure that we're incorporating not just our legislators, but incorporating our local municipalities, the people directly impacted by the issues we're running on, to have a seat at the table so they can lend their voice to the solution.
There's so much for that Democrats are going to want to do if they have that opportunity of a trifecta, right? Because we've had, there was 8 years of Republican-controlled government with Scott Walker and a Republican-controlled legislature. And now we've had 8 years of a divided government with Tony Evers and a Republican-controlled legislature. And like you said, what Evers has done a lot is play goalie. It has not always been, being able to advance things forward. So how do you balance some of these, I guess I kind of characterize them as lower hanging fruit, like the issues that have stalled in the legislature over the past 8 years, with some of that more bold agenda?
Well, one is about bringing people to the table. And I think that the biggest frustrations that we have seen, particularly in this past session, is that, Democrats and Republicans, they don't feel that they've had the opportunity to actually negotiate with one another. And I think that, that's because we've had to play defense, right? And so when we are on offense, we need to make sure we're not just listening to, Democrats across this state, but I would argue we have to listen to independents and Republicans, because we don't have a monopoly on good ideas. Now, it's extremely important that we continue to protect ourselves, right? Because the Republicans have done extreme harm to the state of Wisconsin. But I think it's really about making sure that when the tide rises, all the boats rise. The low-hanging fruit is when everybody benefits, when everybody is able to get a piece of us moving forward as a state. And it's not going to be easy, right? And so one thing that I plan on doing as next governor is having office hours, open office hours for these legislators to come in. Let's talk about the ideas that you have. Let's see what we can do together, because people are tired of politics. They feel like people are trying to force things down their throat rather than trying to find a consensus. And so for me, with this election, this is about how do you build a broad coalition, right? Because there are independents, there are Republicans, there are people who don't care about politics, who are exhausted by this Trump administration, who are exhausted by MAGA. And we need to make sure that as Democrats, we have a big tent, right? And this tent is extremely big, and it can get messy, it can get chaotic. But our ultimate goal is to make sure that we're benefiting families across Wisconsin.
So you obviously have been endorsed by Tony Evers. I'm interested to see if there's anything in particular that you might disagree with him on, or something that you wish had gone differently. Coming from his office over the past 8 years.
Well, honestly, it goes back to the question that we just talked about. One thing I would have, he hasn't been able to be on the offense, and that's what's going to be different for me. And I credit that to the experience I've had in the state capitol. So, I was actually making the sausage. I know what the process looks like, right? And then I became a state representative, chair of the Milwaukee delegation, chair of the Black Legislative Caucus. And so, me being on the offense is where we're going to be able to make a big difference. But I want to be very clear: being on the offense is not just me becoming governor. It's also about those who are viewing this recording right now. Because without a Democratic Senate, without a Democratic Assembly, none of these things become realistic. They don't become real because we're going to continue to be on defense. And so, for me, I'm all about bringing more people to the table. And I was told as an organizer, if you don't have a seat at the table, you're on the menu. And I think that's what's going to be different for me, but also the relationships that we have with local municipalities. How do we make sure that we're not just building those relationships, but we're also addressing their concerns? And I think the governor believes in those things. He just hasn't had the ability to deliver due to having a hostile Republican controlled legislature.
Mm-hmm. So stepping back too, I mean, these last 8 years of state government with Tony Evers as Democratic governor, Republican controlled state legislature. I mean, Evers not seeking another term isn't the only big change coming to the legislature. Yeah. Assembly Speaker Robin Voss is not seeking re-election. Devin LeMahieu is not seeking re-election.
Thank God.
So from a big picture standpoint, when you zoom out, what is your big picture view on how these last 8 years have gone for Wisconsin?
Oh, I mean, it's been chaotic, right? Because, one, I think that divided government is messy and you don't always get what you want, right? And there's always going to be issues related to bipartisanship, but it's about making sure that the people that we represent are getting everything that they need. And so when I think about where we are, I do think that we have been a little chaotic because we have not been focusing on how we move our state forward. And we've been focusing on how, Democrats can win or Republicans can win. And right now, I don't think that this election is necessarily about left or right or blue versus red. This is about right or wrong, the have and the have-nots, and who's going to deliver for every single community across Wisconsin. People are struggling each and every single day, not being able to afford groceries, not being able to afford their utilities or a roof over their head or healthcare or childcare. Like, the list is extremely long. And so, yes, it has been chaotic because nobody feels like they're getting ahead. And so this is the time where we actually need to bring our communities together, right? Get comfortable being uncomfortable, understanding urban, rural, and suburban life. And so what that's going to take is us, not buying into the distraction, not buying into the division that we see happening on both sides of the aisle. And I think, you can't just blame the Republicans. I think we can we can bear some brunt of this as well. But I think that we have a bright future ahead of us, right? And I think that as I travel across the state, they're looking for someone who's going to bring people together, and that's what I've built my career on. Building bridges, not barriers, not walls.
You rejoined the race 16 days ago. This has been a chaotic primary. It's been discombobulating, right? So since you rejoined the race, tell me a little bit about what you've been doing over the past couple of weeks to reach voters.
Well, let's just to be honest, this has been a whirlwind of emotions, of everything, deciding to suspend my campaign was a difficult decision, and getting back into this campaign was a difficult decision. But since we've relaunched, and it's given me an opportunity to reintroduce myself to voters, and we have had an incredible level of momentum. The first week, we raised over $800,000. Not only received the endorsement of Governor Tony Evers, but labor unions all across Wisconsin, as well as recently, we just announced the endorsement of Congresswoman Gwen Moore. And as we travel across this state, we have been seeing the enthusiasm showing up, and people asking, well, first and foremost, like, who is this guy that the governor just endorsed? And so, and when you think about it, right, no campaign has seen this level of energy in the past couple of weeks. And so we want to continue to ride this wave until the end of this primary. But I want to continue to stress to everybody, right, like, everybody in this race, we all have the same damn goal. That's to ultimately defeat Tom Tiffany, because we don't need MAGA occupying this governor's office. And so while folks are focusing on building up their candidate, let's not tear other candidates down, because we need to make sure that we can ultimately come together to make sure that Tom Terrible Tiffany doesn't become the next governor and that he doesn't have a Republican controlled legislature to do even more harm to our great state.
Mhm. So one of the things I noticed in some of the polling that we saw last week is that while you're well known and well liked
Mhm.
here in Milwaukee and in southeastern Wisconsin, you're not as well known around the state.
Yeah.
So what has been your message to folks in places like the Fox Valley, western Wisconsin, the Northwoods about why they should support you?
Well, first, I'm not even talking about I'm giving my stump, but it's really about listening. And I think that we have lost the art of listening and lost the art of building relationships with communities that we represent. And when you go into these rural communities, they're talking about affordability, they're talking about housing, they're talking about PFAS, they're talking about levy limits and shared revenue. And so, the message that I'm bringing is that I am a Democrat that can get stuff done. I've been able to deliver for all of these communities already when we passed Act 12. And those resources continue to be invested in those communities, in public safety and infrastructure and things of that nature. And so my message is really about making sure that they are not forgotten and that they need to have a seat at the table. Because when you think about rural communities, our seniors, our farmers, our young people, our workers, they all feel like they've been on the menu. And that's because we are not asking them for the solution. And so what I'm bringing to the table is my experience of being an executive, the only executive in this race, being the fact that I represent 19 different municipalities across the political spectrum, and how we have been able to come together to tackle major issues in the largest and most diverse community in Wisconsin. That we're going to make sure that we lift up their voice, and it's been resonating. And they want someone who's not just going to tackle the issues that matter most to them, but who can actually win this race. They care a lot about electability, and I was very surprised to be hearing that all across this state as I was traveling over this weekend.
Yeah, I know you've been hitting the road a little bit
Yeah.
as of late. I have one non-political question for
Okay.
you about being on the road. I have to imagine that you have some point stopped at a Culver's.
Yes.
What is your Culver's order?
Oh man, my Culver's order is a double butter burger with no pickles, and I have to have cheese curds and a raspberry cooler.
And are you a fan of the Culver's cheese curds?
I will eat Culver's cheese curds. Are there better cheese curds across the state? Man, listen, I've had some good cheese curds. It was just at a supper club in the Northwoods called Jake's, and they probably had the best cheese curds I've ever had in my life.
All right, I'll put them on the list. Okay, so one of your opponents in the race is a Democratic Socialist.
Mhm.
In your time as Milwaukee County Executive, there were a number of Democratic Socialists who have served on the Milwaukee County Board.
Yeah.
How would you characterize your relationship with them and with Milwaukee DSA more broadly in your time as county executive?
Well, I would characterize it as we have conversations and we have tough conversations, and they hold me accountable when needed. But it's also about making sure that we're having honest conversations. And, what's been interesting, particularly throughout this race, is the amount of attacks that, not just me, but some of the supporters that we have seen coming from DSA. And I don't think that we should be interjecting national politics to what we got going on here in the state of Wisconsin. But I do think that Democratic Socialists of America, they have a role in our politics, right? And I think that they can land great policies. They help push us in a different direction when it comes down to Democrats. And quite frankly, I think they agree with me on a lot of different issues. I don't necessarily agree with them on every single issue, but it doesn't mean that they're not accepted or we can't accept one another in this big tent that we call the Democratic Party.
So, in an interview I did with Francesca Hong earlier this year, she talked about why she was a Democratic Socialist and not just a Democrat. One of the things that she was critical of with regards to the Democratic Party was what she considered to be the problem of elitism. She said, quote, "We appealed to the college educated, the folks who are our donor base, and we lost working class people." Do you agree with that?
I do agree with that. I think that we've been trying to be the party of taking the high road and not really talking about directly about these issues. And then, I've talked about this as a state representative. I've talked about this as a county executive. But where I come from, you know, I was born in poverty, right? I was not born with a silver spoon in my mouth. And, this is about protecting the people. I got involved in politics because I wanted to make a change. It was my community that saved my life. And we have to get comfortable being uncomfortable, right? I mean, when I travel to these rural areas, they're like, finally, you came to visit us, because they don't see too many Democrats. We can't continue to just go in places that we know that we can win. We have to do the hard work. We can't act like we can continue to just waltz on in and just gain these votes, right? And there are a lot of people who don't believe in this party anymore because we have not been delivering. And so that's what's different for me. As county executive, as a state representative, I have not made a promise that I did not keep. And I think, we need more Democrats like myself who are going to come to the table, have these tough conversations. And I think that when it comes down to accountability, those are the types of voices that we need to hear, because there are a lot of people who are making minimum wage and wondering why the Democrats haven't changed that in Wisconsin. For example, I made $7 an hour when I was a kid, right? And we have a minimum wage of $7.25 an hour. And so who do we blame for that, right? We had total control in 2008, and people can't even remember what we did with total control. And so I understand the frustrations, but this is why we need people to be a part of the party, right? We don't, and we can't continue to fracture ourselves because we're playing into the hands of what Donald Trump and Republicans want. And we see that right now with the fact that, the Republican Governors Association, you have Turning Point, who are spending money in our Democratic primaries because they believe that the candidate they're spending money on is the easiest to beat, right? But we have to push back and really focus on who we are as a party and really define ourselves moving forward, because they are doing it for us.
Mm-hmm. So speaking of Francesca Hong, then, I want to talk about something that's been in the news over the last 24 hours. So yesterday in Milwaukee County, Hong held a rally with Congresswoman Ilhan Omar and Hassan Piker. Mm-hmm. In June, when Hong appeared on Piker's show as part of a fundraiser, you issued a statement criticizing that decision, saying you would not appear with him if invited.
Yeah.
In comments Hong made speaking with the media at that event after the rally about whether appearing with him is a risk, she said, quote, "It would be a risk not to try to build the broadest coalition possible." So that phrasing sounded a little familiar to me because it is not unlike phrasing that you have used a number of times earlier in the conversation at your speech at 3rd Street Market Hall when you relaunched your campaign. Now, I think anybody has to draw the line somewhere.
Yeah.
So where do you draw the line? How do you draw the line? And what is your thought process in determining where that line is drawn?
Well, I'll draw the line where we are making statements just for clickbait, where we're making statements that divide us. I believe in the First Amendment. But I do believe that when you're a community leader, when you're an elected leader, who you lend credibility to matters. And so we can build the broadest coalition without necessarily leading credibility to people who, in my personal opinion, is not doing any good or moving our party forward. Is only focusing on dividing us, even within the Democratic Party. And so for me, I draw the line on folks who speak destruction into reality. I draw the line on those who want to continue to divide our entire country, and who don't see the big picture. Now, I don't know Hassan. I don't know his views. Well, I've heard some of the things that really turned me off. And when I think about that, it's really about how do we create more unity. And so that's really where I draw the line. I want to focus on the things that make us better. I want to focus on joy. I don't want us to be building coalitions because we hate the same thing. Right? I want to build coalitions because we believe in the same thing. We believe in the same future. We believe in the same goals, and we're going to do everything that we can to reach those goals and not just try to tear people down, because these are people who are giving back to our community in whatever capacity as well. And so I just hate the divide and the distraction that we're seeing all across this country.
All right, a couple more things because I know you've got tight on time here. You've got a lot to get to. So another topic: since you entered the race, you have been endorsed by several unions.
Yeah.
You've been endorsed by the Professional Firefighters Union, Labor's District Council, electrical workers, operating engineers, plumbers, carpenters, more. What does it mean to you to be the candidate backed by these unions, and what does that say about how you would want to govern?
I think having union support shows that I'm always going to fight for the little guy, for the little woman, right? And I think about, we're talking about unions who have been decimated from the Scott Walker era, not giving people the ability to collectively bargain. When you think about unions, they don't just protect themselves in their membership, they actually protect all workers across this state, across this entire country. And being the son of a union worker myself, it means a lot, because when you're recognized by those who have helped your family build, something for themselves, they recognize that leadership. They recognize that I'm always going to fight on their behalf. And so to receive the union endorsement, I hope it's a signal to everyone that I'm always going to fight for every single worker in the state of Wisconsin, whether you're part of a union or not.
There have been a lot of forums in this campaign over the course of it. throughout this process, you've got to hear a lot of other candidates' policies as well. In those forums, is there any policy that you heard another candidate discuss that you thought, I like that one, I'd like to incorporate that into my plan?
I mean, when I've been at most of these forums, there hasn't been a lot of disagreement when it comes down to a lot of the policies. Well, I mean, there are some disagreements, but when you think about it, we all believe in public education. You know, we believe in making sure that we raise the minimum wage and repeal Act 10. I think particularly for me is related to how I can know that I can get these things done. Whether we have the trifecta, as we all call it, inside political baseball, or whether we don't, because I've been able to be successful even through a Republican-controlled legislature. But the one thing that I would say that that I want to continue to stress is that it doesn't matter who the candidate is. August 12th, we need to come together.
Yeah. So with that in mind, in a big field, like most candidates, a big field like this are not going to win. If you do come up short, do you pledge to support the Democratic nominee, no matter who it is?
Listen, I will tell everybody it's blue no matter who. You know, ultimately, I'm not afraid of who's coming out of the Democratic side. I'm afraid of MAGA controlling this state. And when you think about Tom Tiffany, he has not done anything for the state of Wisconsin. He just voted to take away health care from everybody across this country. You know, he has voted to try to, continue to allow us to burn more coal. He only cares about, serving this Trump administration versus serving the constituents of Wisconsin. And so I'm going to be focusing on making sure that we not just elect a Democrat, but we're electing Democrats up and down the ticket, because we have an attorney general's race, we have a secretary of state race, a treasurer's race, state assembly, a state senate, as well as local races across the state as well. And so we all need to band together. We all have a role to play, but our job is to make sure that Democrats are in the driver's seat in the next, not just 2 to 4 years, I would argue for the next 4 to 8 years.
All right, so 8 days until the primary. What's next?
Listen, I plan on traveling all across this state. You know, tonight I'm going to be spending some time in Appleton with the governor. We're going to be traveling to La Crosse. We're going to be traveling even more to the Northwoods, Kenosha, Waukesha, Madison, Racine. And so I don't plan on sleeping in my own bed this week. And so I'm looking forward to just touching as many voters as possible, working the roads, letting them know the policies that we're putting on the table, but more importantly, how I'm the best candidate to win this race. With all the head-to-head polling that we have seen in a general election, I beat Tom Tiffany. And that's why we want to make sure that we understand what is at stake and why I'm the best candidate to become the next governor of Wisconsin.
David Crowley, thanks for joining us at the Recombobulation Area.
Thank you for having me.